guys? Well, welcome back to Factory Fresh, where we are in the middle of our 1994 GMC K1500 all-wheel drive. Started as a V6, 4060 or 700R4, 241 four-wheel drive transfer case. We're putting a V8 in it, converting it to all-wheel drive, a 4L80, potentially turbo, supercharged something, but we're gonna make this a rowdy street truck. Where are we? We last kind of left off pulling all of the old powertrain out. Luckily, as you can see, we cleaned up the garage a little bit from last episode. Got all the wife's furniture boxes out, got the old powertrain off. We ended up selling it. We are basically at this state. We've got the LS kind of prepped and ready to go. We've got the front diff that we're gonna need to convert from four-wheel drive to all-wheel drive, as well as the transmission we did a rebuild on. If you guys wanna see any of that, check out some previous episodes. Today, we're at an interesting point. I pulled the front diff out, so I may have had some video of that. And just got the diff out. Basically, we need to do some fabrication to get the all-wheel drive diff in here and not the four-wheel drive. So we're gonna go over all that specifics and fab in how to mount that in. Looking at everything now, we get to a point where we are at the while I'm there point, which means engine's pulled out. I've got access to all this steering stuff. You can see everything is just super hatched out. So I kind of cleaned up all the frame rails. We spray painted it, prevented some rust and corrosion. But generally speaking, all of these tie rods and the idler arm and the pitman and everything is just wore out steering wise. It's super sloppy. And the eventual goal of this truck is to be fast 0 to 60 because we can do those all-wheel drive digs. But also I want to get it on an autocross track or even an open road course and just be able to put power down to the ground. So straight line will be cool, but I'd like to turn and enjoy the truck in that way as well. So we do probably need to pay attention to the steering. I don't like getting in the while I'm there scenario because then you have projects that last forever because you're like, oh, while I'm there, I'm gonna replace this, I'm gonna upgrade this, I'm gonna fix this. Next thing you know, you have way too much money to a project, way too much time, and it's not running. So I try to avoid that, but we do have to focus on steering. So we got some parts in. I'm not super familiar with TRQ. So we got every single piece of the steering system, from every single ball joint and tie rod, idler arm, everything is in here. So let's get all of this unpacked and lay it out. And that's gonna be kind of what we're gonna focus on today, is getting this steering out. Let's do it. I'll get you guys up on a tripod and let's get cracking. All right, so getting into the suspension and steering. We're gonna pull this tire off. Big old wheel spacer on there, which kind of gave that cool stance, but we're going to be getting rid of that. So laying out all the new parts. There was the TRQ stuff, maybe kind of questionable. It's pretty cheap. A lot of it didn't have grease zerks on it, which we may end up changing some stuff in the future, but overall everything went in pretty smooth. Looked like good stuff. Got rid of the really old, outdated, grimy stuff. My only recommendation, if you guys get into this stuff, is get a good set of pickle forks. So all these taper joints are really stuck on, and no matter how hard you release the nuts and hammer on stuff, you're probably not going to get stuff apart until you start to get a good pickle fork in there and start hammering on that. So we get through this stuff pretty good and really ended up cleaning up some of the engine compartment as well as all the steering and suspension parts. So I'm really happy with it. All right, fellers, we have a quick update. As you guys kind of saw, we've got all these old grimy, gooey suspension parts out of the OBS, and it's a pretty darn good feeling. So getting this stuff out of here, let's kind of go through. You saw we've got the upper control arms we did the bushings in the sway bar, the end links in the sway bar, all of our tie rods, our ball joint. We have a ball joint for this lower control arm right here. Few concerns, we can kind of address those. Coming over here, we got the idler arm replaced, we got the pitman arm, and then the same thing on this other side as the passenger. We've got the upper control arm, which is nice. It has a grease zerk. One of the concerns, we got this TRQ suspension components. They weren't the most expensive. These tie rods do not, you know, they got the big rubber boot here that generally I always assumed these fill with grease. However, there's no zerk and there's not grease in these. I mean, it's better than what they were. You can look at the factory stuff and everything was torn and the boots are all grimy, but I mean, they have grease zerks on them and they're full of grease. So having an empty dry boot, and I don't know how I'd put grease in them. You guys have any inputs on that, if that's normal? If we do need to replace some of these new parts, that's fine. It's all pretty new. Everything's been torqued down and put a cotter pin in and stuff. It's good to go. It's way cleaner. Everything's been worked through, kind of put a spray coat of some rust inhibitor on everything just to get us going. So this suspension is not gonna work. As you guys can see, we've got torsion bar suspension with just a shock. That's all going away. So there's gonna be some fabrication. We're not gonna be using torsion bar front suspension. We're not going to be using solid axle rear. We're going to have some good stuff going in there, but that's for another day. This is the piece. One piece we didn't really put in was these ball joints on the bottom. Again, huge ball joint, no grease zerk, this boot, and there's no grease in there. Little bit of a concern, didn't put them in, why not? We have to do some fabrication on those lower control arms when we get to the suspension install and what we're gonna kind of do on this. That's gonna be a surprise for another episode, but it's something we can address with some quality or higher end parts, because I would like grease zerks and ball joints that are full of grease and even tie rod ends that are full of grease. So we'll see, not a big deal. Still a really good feeling to have a pile of old grimy tore up parts. This thing's gonna be a lot tighter just from doing that stuff than it was. All right, so that kind of brings us back into the engine bay here, and we've got everything nice cleaned up. Did what we could do for maintenance. We pulled this front diff out. So you can see there's a mounting point here, there's an arm that attaches there. That attaches one part of the diff. And then we have a diff mount here, and here are the other main points for that diff. So let me get you guys set up. We'll pull out the old stuff and the new stuff and kind of go over what we're gonna do. But we need to do some fabrication and get that new front diff mounted. And we'll kind of go over what we need to do and why we're doing it. All right, let me go see if I can dig this front diff or both of these front diffs out. And we can kind of go over what we're thinking here. Okay, this is our old diff. All right, she ain't light, but or she ain't heavy, but she ain't light either. All right, so what are the differences? We kind of talked about old diff. 373 gear, same as the rear axle. This is a 373 gear. It's not that. You can look at the mounting points here as we kind of lay this out. We got a mount here, got a bushing mount here, same thing. And then you guys can see, or maybe this mount down here, same thing, driver side. Same mounts down here with the bushing mount. So pretty similar. Where we get some differences, width is exactly the same, I believe. We're about to find out. What is different, where we need to fabricate some stuff, is this pad mount right here is different than this one. I don't know if you guys can really see it, but this is completely flat on the new one. The old one has kind of a curve and it's rocked up maybe 20 degrees. So we need to fabricate a mount for this side in the truck on the frame. Hey, don't open that. What are you doing? Yeah, hold on. Stand by. My 13-year-old is trying to open the garage door. So the old diff, if you guys can see, has this electric lock unlock. So this was for a four-wheel drive. You engage your four-wheel drive It engages basically your transfer case, and this front diff is going to be electronically locked through here too. It's kind of a weak point, it can break. You could get a lockout in here. I could replace this and slide a sleeve in that just keeps it locked all the time. I don't think it's as strong, and this is from a 94, and this is from like an 02 Denali that's made to always just be functioning in an all-wheel drive. So the parts I feel are less used, a lot newer. We should have a stronger axle in here because it's one solid axle, which this one is basically two with this collar that slides over it and locks it in place. So if we put down a lot of power, we could kind of break it at that point. So why not? This is super cheap. I don't know, I paid, you know, probably $100 for this or less, pulling it from a junkyard. So let's make this work. Let's get it into the truck, kind of see how we need to build that mount, and then just get after it. Let's do it. So what we were kind of talking about on that flat perch mount on that front differential, this arm basically connects in the frame at this bushing and this bushing, and it's rocked up in here, and there's the curved pad on that new front diff we're putting in, or sorry, the old one has this curved mounting point here. We need to basically, and it's rocked up. The new one is flat and it's rocked down. I don't think I can reuse this. I potentially could and build a plate off of this to mount everything. I don't really want to do that. I love doing metal work. I'm not that good at it, but you know, we got a tube bender. We've got a bunch of metalworking tools and we're working through it. What's up, dude?
I am hungry. Are we gonna go to get some hamburgers yet?
Yep, in just a second. We gotta go get some hamburgers shortly. Well, let's talk about this first real quick. I like doing metal work. I bought some good high quality DOM bushing. These are 2.5 inch wide. You can see they've got the inserts here. And then we have some good high quality bushings. What we're gonna do, and we like bending tube, and honestly, I've got a bunch of scrap tube. This is an old door bar. Those of you that know the GT100, a 2016 Mustang, body swapped with a 62 unibody. It's at the interior shop right now, but we built a bunch of cage stuff to tie the unibody into the cab, and this was basically the door bar that we messed up. I'm gonna kind of salvage some of this stuff, and I want to build out of DOM, replicate this bracket, and then notch cut the tube into this DOM. It's going to be new good bushings in here, and then we'll build a plate off of this new bracket to mount the new diffs. We've got the front diff in, and as we suspected, it does mount in for the most part. So this first big bushing mount you guys can see up here is the same. There's one also in the rear down here is the same, and then this is the arm that kind of attaches from this attachment point here and down here. Even trying to fit this old girl in here like this, like it's gonna have interference. What we're gonna have to do is get our tube and kind of measure. We're gonna have to come up pretty steep and then across. So I'm thinking almost a 90 degree up and then across, or yeah, it's gonna have to be a 90. And then let's just start kind of messing around with it and see what we can make work with our scrap tube. If not, we can put it back in the bender and make some bends to make it work. So let's go figure it out. like a glove. Alright, well, let's cope this side. Then we can creep on this side. We know we're gonna have to cope this, probably not trim it anymore, and then this one will slowly start getting it shorter until we can drop in and be perfect. When you're cutting this tube, you're coping these notches, you've got to grind this down so it's good weldable surfaces. Obviously you can see like how thin this is. You got to grind all that down or it's just going to blow through and have crappy welds. Let's clean this up and prep it more so like this coped end, and then we'll sand it down, get all this mill scale off of it so we can tack it in place in the truck, and then we'll pull the whole assembly out and we can finish weld it and then work on building that plate in here that we talked about. All right, well, we've got the tube cleaned down and we got all the mill scale off of it. We ground down our copes so they're nice and weldable. There's not those really thin surfaces on there. Pulled out our bushings and we're gonna clean these up too so we have some nice bright metal to basically mock everything back up. We'll tack it in place to replace this old clunky thing. That's flammable. Let's not put that by the welder. Hurt. All right, I think that'll do her. Pull her off, get her welded up on the table. So we're at the table with the tacked up piece here. We do have some gap. You know, this isn't perfect, but that's the beautiful thing about welding is we can kind of fill these gaps. Nice thing about having a welding table is you can just lay the pieces down. Obviously metal is grounded and I can just ground on here and I don't have to worry about clamping on the thing, but sometimes your welds are kind of questionable. You're wondering your machine ain't working real good, and I've realized generally it grounds, so if I can, I'm just going to still clamp it to this. All right, I think we got her whipped. Like I said, listen, this ain't can dig it fab here. We're working on it, but we've got some gaps with these copes. You can see some big stuff here. Again, not a huge issue. I can fill that up with the MIG welder. It'll be super structural. But now that we've kind of tacked it and we're gonna cross our fingers and hope it fits when we put a bunch of heat into it, let's pull these bushings out because we do not want to melt those. Get a nice good bead around here. I could jig this so it stays to the orientation, but I'm not gonna. So we'll give her a shot. Let's see what happens. Get these bushings out.
Oh, they're kind of gooey. One.
Pretty dang good looking welds, good penetration. This is a little thicker, the bushing. This is a 250 wall, so 1/4 inch, and the tube is an 1/8 inch. Obviously, I'm not giving advice to some of you out there. Some of you guys have some serious skill, I'm sure. For those hobby welders, kind of like me, that are learning, love fabrication, but kind of learning as we go. When you're welding, make sure you're putting a lot of heat into the thicker metal first, and then you kind of just pull the puddle into the thinner material. And then when you look at that coloration, you can kind of see good penetration. So I'm happy with this. Let's let this cool down and then put the bushings back in, and let's see if it still fits, because this is hot and it may have moved. Where we are at with the bracket for the front diff, it did actually fit, so that is a good thing. Fit in good, tube cooled down. We put the bushings back in. We measured for the plate, cut the plate, pulled everything off, re-mocked it up. Everything was still good. Drilled the holes for a 1/2 inch bolt. And now we're just working on this little rib. Some of the stuff you guys missed, the way I bend these plates, I don't have a break here. So I just kind of score a line with my bandsaw or any cutting blade, and then I'll bend it off this metal table. So that's how we got the 90. I did weld a little seam in that 90 degree in here, just so it's more, has some more strength with it. So what we're kind of working now is, I want to put a little ridge inside of this bracket just to add some rigidity. It's not really needed, but while we're here kind of thing, it'll, I think, just in case, you never know. But I don't think there's a lot of stress on this because of all the mounting points. The way I like to do that is I'll get some ram board, and I just cut a piece. Let me go see where the heck that thing is. But I cut a little 2 1/4 inch tab to measure in here, and I just need to get the height now with my ram board. Ram board, just a little cardboard. You can get it at any home type store. A lot easier to work with than steel. I'll get my template here on my 2 inch square. Like a glove. Pretty much, I'm gonna sand the corners down a little bit. Actually, go this way. It'll be probably better that way. Here is the finished product. Looks really good. We have 1 3/4 120 wall. We've got the end bushings. That's 2 inch, I believe, 250 wall, so 1/4 inch. We have our nice little plate here with the gusset in the middle just for strength. Drilled the 1/2 inch bolt holes, but it looks really good. Spray painted up just to keep it nice and clean. And we are gonna mount this in. All right, boys, well, here is the finished product, and it looks solid. Way better mounting setup here. This all-wheel drive differential that we're putting in the OBS doesn't have the vacuum disconnect or electric disconnect. One axle, all-time all-wheel drive. That's gonna kind of facilitate what we're doing here. So have the factory clamshell mounts in, our custom mount here that we kind of just went through, so it's real nice and firm. And then nice, believe it or not, this factory diff mounts up to these factory mount position here, and then underneath the diff, right under there. And it's the exact same width. So you can see axle flange there and the axle flange. I don't know if you guys can see it back over there. They're basically the exact same width, so we didn't have to worry about that. Likely we're gonna upgrade these axles because high power turning, it will blow those things apart, and these are pretty hashed out, but we'll get to that. The steering, everything is super cleaned up here. Everything was kind of a greasy mess and blown out with tie rods and ball joints and whatnot. And now we've got all this new clean stuff in here. Obviously need to address the suspension. We're not gonna be doing torsion bar stuff, which is what this 4-wheel drive is set up for. We've made a lot of good progress today on getting this thing ready to be slammed down in all-wheel drive. All right, boys. Well, I got cleaned up and made a lot of good progress today with the suspension and replacing all that worn out, beat up stuff with the new fresh parts. That always feels good. And the big one is that front diff, getting a kind of, I don't want to say custom, but that front diff from a Denali later years, getting it in that front end of the OBS, or what we may be calling the old Yeller. So the old owner actually reached out, the guy I bought it from, and I'd mentioned I was going to build it and had a YouTube channel. So he reached out on the comments and kind of mentioned, oh, Old Yeller, you're working on that. So I kind of like that. I'm sorry, I forget your name. I do like Old Yeller. So maybe, I don't know. What do you guys think? Old Yeller? Just to recap, all-wheel drive, we're going to slam it down. We got to address the suspension. This thing is a four-wheel drive. Converting to all-wheel drive, we are not going to be using torsion bar suspension, things like that. But V8, LS, 4L80, NP 149 transfer case, basically so we can just get an all-wheel drive ripper and just tear it around and do it on a budget too. So I'm going to go over kind of what this stuff costs. Obviously not labor, but parts wise. And this is not going to be a high dollar expensive build, but I think we're going to get high dollar performance out of it, and it'll be fun to just kind of tear up. Also, we're going to be getting the GT100 back. So if you guys are waiting for that, still at upholstery, but it will be here hopefully in the next couple weeks. And we've got to finish up some stuff and finalize a lot of work on that too. So with that, as always, thanks for commenting. I always contribute to that stuff. I enjoy interacting with you guys. Like, subscribe, and God bless, and long live hot rodding.